Hello and welcome to episode 275 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi, and we have a delightful DS doozy for you this week to talk about Radiant Historia, the 2010-2011 DS RPG from Atlas when their logo made a little bit more sense. So joining me for today's Radiant Historia discussion are Kaleb Curry.
Hello.
Pete Leavitt.
Hello.
And Alana Hagues.
You've returned, listeners.
So, folks, we're playing Radiant Historia this month for the podcast. It didn't exactly come out of nowhere. It's been on our big ideas board for, I think, years. There was interest among RPG fan staff to play or replay this game. And I played it around when it came out, probably in 2011 or 2012, and have fond memories of it. But replaying it for this podcast, it's like I'm sort of surprised at what I'm remembering, and surprised at what I've forgotten, because this game has some wild plot twists and turns from the get-go, and I'm pretty invested. I ended up finishing the first 3 chapters. I'm right at the beginning of chapter 4 in both timelines, which we will explain and get into a little bit. But let's talk about our background with Radiant Historia, individually, personally. I already went, I guess. So, Alana, is this your first time playing Radiant Historia?
Yeah, it is, and I think I've said this a few times on the show recently. Radiant Historia, in its original DS release, never came out in Europe. Atlas, and this is something I've kind of repeated a few times as well, Atlas didn't really have much of a publishing branch out here. So if we got an Atlas game, it usually was Persona, or it was digitally, or just not at all in the case of Radiant Historia. Yeah, we didn't get it until Perfect Chronology, which is the 2018 3DS re-release, which has some extra content, a new timeline, and some redrawn character art. But I do have the DS version, the original release. I got it as a gift from an RPG fan staff member a few years ago, and because DS is a region free, that's great. So yeah, this is my first time playing it, and I'm really loving it so far. Excellent.
And any early impressions other than really loving it so far?
I mean, I knew the music was great, but let's talk about Yoko Shimomura and how great she is as a composer.
Yeah, she is.
Good.
Yeah, this is so good. Like, to think that she worked on this and Xenoblade Chronicles at the same time.
Really?
Her work on Xenoblade is definitely a little bit less. It's more of an Ace Plus Kiyotaka thing. Yeah, this Radiant Historia is like one of my favorite soundtracks of hers, and has been for a while, so the context has been very lovely to add to the music. But yeah, like everything, it just feels, so far, like it just feels really solid, and I don't like using this comparison a ton, but like there's something very old school about it. It feels like something I could have played 20 years ago, say. It doesn't feel out of place with the SNES era in its kind of stylings, the characters, the story, everything. So yeah, it's very familiar, but it does some really interesting things, and yeah, I'm excited to talk about them.
Speaking of Yoko Shimomura again, I mean, the soundtrack for this is great, but you mentioning how it being close to Xenoblade made me wonder if this crossed over with Bowser's Inside Story, which is another one of her great soundtracks. But I think Bowser's Inside Story was over a year before the release of Radiant Historia, so they probably didn't cross over.
Yeah, it was 2009 or 8, I think, Bowser's Inside Story. Xenoblade was 2010, mid-2010 in Japan, and Radiant Historia, I think, was November or December 2010 in Japan. So
yep, it was November 2010 in Japan and February 2011 in North America. So and it didn't have a European release. So for 3/4 of this podcast, this is roughly the 10-year anniversary of Radiant Historia. But speaking of the other North Americans on this podcast, Pete, I think you told me this was not your first time playing Radiant Historia, but on this revisitation, what are your early impressions?
Well, yeah, I played it about 2 years ago now, and I'm kind of like you. I'm surprised at what I remember and what I didn't remember. But I'd like to speak on something that Alana said, which is true, that there's a lot of there's a familiar feeling with this one, if as far as it feeling like maybe an older RPG potentially. that's one of the things that I really appreciate about it, because what that does is and we'll talk about this later, just to kind of preface it, it makes some of the subversions it does stand out a little bit. I think that a lot of the reverence that those older games had in their tropes and whatnot, particularly with the characters, I find a lot of the characterizations pretty surprising, especially going through it again and seeing potential archetypes in some of these characters, and seeing how much more human they are than they initially appear based on the archetype you might assign to them at first. And yeah, I mean, it feels in many ways kind of old school, but also really fresh in some of those other ways. And going back to it even so soon has been really delightful, actually.
Okay, I'm not sure about character archetypes, but this game, does have sort of big, detailed sprite work and portraits that wouldn't be completely out of place in a, I don't know, let's say a late era PlayStation game. But it has gameplay ideas and certain presentation elements, like a nice big plot flow chart for one, that make it much more firmly rooted in the 2000s than in the 90s, I think. But I mean, just having those those big sprites moving around with footstep sounds is delightfully old school in its way. Kaleb, first, is this your first time playing Radiant Historia, and what are your early impressions?
So yes, it is my first time playing it, but I've owned it for almost a decade. So I've mentioned to every single person I've ever spoken with, but I really like Mega Man Battle Network. And this has a similar, visually similar battle setup where you got the 3x3 grid. The 5 minutes of internet research I did when I first got it back, when it first released, said oh, this is similar. So I went in basically wanting more Mega Man Battle Network because I couldn't get enough of it. And it wasn't exactly like that, so I got grumpy and I'm I'm not playing this. And so now I finally have, and spoiler alert, I love it. And I guess my first impression, just to sort of bounce off of the classic things you guys have been alluding to, but for me it feels like a classic, not really because of the visuals or the gameplay, but because it's it's kind of like a flawed masterpiece to me. I really love it, but then those flaws are charming, kind of like an old game. So we'll get into it more, but I'm really loving it.
Right, and this is a bit of an interesting era for Atlus, because basically their incredibly strong run on the PS2 was over. This game came out about a year after Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey on the DS, and a few months before Catherine on the PS3 and 360 came out. So this is after their really good PS2 run, before they exploded internationally, as this game's lack of a European release is illustrative of. And I don't want to say it was an awkward period, but it wasn't. It's sort of the end of a particular golden age of Atlus that RPG fan holds in high esteem. I think for a while, you could call our website SMT fan or Atlus fan in that run of the late 2000s. There was an incredible enthusiasm around the company on our website, even though all four of us joined RPG fan staff well after that time. But so I don't know if we want to call it a lost classic or a hidden classic, because it did have a 3DS release several years later. But I think that it was always sort of a cult hit, and it was definitely present in our minds when we were thinking of games to play for the podcast, because it's shown up on our internal ideas board and polls before. So I'm glad to be finally replaying it. Now that I've listened to you tell your story, I think it's coming back to me a little stronger. I remembered I tried to emulate this game and play it on an R4 cartridge pretty soon after it came out, because it got good reviews and it was an RPG, and I like well-reviewed RPGs. But I think the DS version has a fail-safe where if it doesn't check some one line of code or one bit that is in a cart, you can't leave the starting city. So I played the first 10 minutes of this game a couple times trying to leave Alistel on playing on an R4 and couldn't. And like, well, I already know I like this, and it's getting good reviews. I guess I better track down a copy. And I think it was slightly hard to find because I was playing it several months after it came out. But I did eventually track down a copy and play it through. And now I'm replaying it on that same DS copy. I remember some GBA and DS games did have that kind of failsafe on it. I remember that I didn't try to pirate this one, but the DS version of Dragon Quest V, you can't leave the ship at the beginning if you are playing a pirated version. So this was just a slightly old school DRM from 10 years ago that is all rushing back to me now. But let's talk about the game itself. Kaleb, you mentioned that this is a little bit like Mega Man Battle Network. Not Metal Man Battle Network, but I'd play that also. But I haven't played any MMBN games. In those, is it only the enemies that are on a grid, or is Mega Man also on the grid interacting with them?
So, in practice, it's absolutely nothing like that game. But visually... Mega Man is set up on a 3x3 grid, and he moves around. It's kind of like a real-time action card-based RPG. So it's like really cool, but this is nothing like that, even though it's equally interesting battle system.
Yeah, I'm used to only choosing which boss I'm going to face next on a 3x3 grid in a Mega Man game. But Radiant Historia is interesting in that a lot of strategy RPGs take place on grids of squares or hexes that fans of Matsuno games or Disgaea or Fire Emblem will definitely know. But Radiant Historia only really the enemies exist on a grid, while your player characters are on the right side of the screen in just like a Kabuki theater battle, like Final Fantasies 1 through 6. So you're like the part of player movement and positioning and defense. Interacting with a grid is absent in Radiant Historia, but you manipulate the grid and enemy position on the grid a lot playing Radiant Historia, and that was they teach it to you pretty quickly. I think in the first or second battle they are encouraging you to shove enemies into each other and getting combos and different hits, and by the end of the game you can manipulate enemy turns like you're playing a Grandia game, or have your turn into another character's turn and build up meter that lets you manipulate eliminate enemy turns. It's pretty wild, the twists that they give on grid-based combat and turn-based JRPG combat. So before we get into the story at all, let's talk about how the game fights. What was everyone's impressions about the combat?
Oh, the combat is so awesome. It's like the story and characters are great in this game. I think that you come here for the combat and stay for the story. It's what first kind of drew me in. There's another cool bit in that of risk and reward, where I think from the beginning, if not really early on, you can basically sacrifice your turns to switch with an enemy, and that lowers your defense. So you can, you have your timeline on the left side, and you can take out your turn, replace it with an enemy, so an enemy will go instead, and your defense, that character's defense, will be a little bit lowered. And you can do that and take that risk and potentially group your party all together on the timeline, over and over, and just rack up enormous combos. And it all is based on pushing enemies around and setting traps on the grid and pushing them into the traps and all kinds of just awesome stuff.
Yeah. Once Ott joins your party, every single fight becomes a place the trap and move enemies into the trap.
How do you beat this game without Ott? She's incredible.
Yeah. She's so good.
She's the best healer, or tied for the best healer. Her trap offense is insane, and she's the fastest character by a factor of 40% or something. She gets twice as many turns as poor Rosh.
They do a really smart thing because it's not my instinct to use something like traps in a game like this. It's it's much more obvious to do much more direct moves. But the smart thing they did was very simple. They just made the traps really powerful.
I think the trap damage costs only, I think 5 SP or MP, while a normal base level spell costs maybe 4. but it deals about as much damage as like a 2.5 level spell. Like I think like slightly less damage than Rainey's most powerful elemental magic. So and Ott joins in chapter 1.5 or 2 or something. So it's an incredibly powerful offense that completely changes how combat works. Listeners, if you didn't gather it yet, the game takes place in a 3x3 grid, and there are spells where where you cast it and then the enemy is instantly affected by it. But Otts turn one square in the grid into a trap, and then you can use the push, pull, shove mechanics of other characters to place enemies onto the traps and deal incredible damage, and it is so satisfying every time. It's I think like the most fun way for me to play this game is to have the party be Stock, Ott, and then one character that can push or pull, like Marco or Gafka or Roche. Roche? Are we decided on that one?
I think it's Roche, isn't it?
Roche?
Surely.
Okay.
Yeah, I say Roche.
Is the 3DS version voiced?
I believe it is, so maybe we'll find out between recordings.
Yep, maybe. But I think I really couldn't decide, so I probably will say both ways multiple times on the podcast. That's on me.
Well, if you're into fighting games, you can like air juggle too. You can juggle them like 2 or 3 times up in the air, and then they come slamming down, and that does damage too.
Yeah, there's a few of us who are into fighting games, so I've done that a few times.
You could say that. like briefly turn the game into a round of Tekken when Gafka uses his big old uppercut. But
Tekken or air cancelling in Guilty Gear, yeah.
So good.
Or if you're good at Virtua Fighter, you can probably do that as well. But I think Virtua Fighter is the most incomprehensible of the 3D fighting games. I cannot do a single thing to look cool in a Virtua Fighter game. But anyway. So there's juggling and trap mechanics and movement mechanics, but only for when you're attacking the enemy and not when the enemy is attacking you, making this and there's turn manipulation on a grid like a Grandia but with player turn order represented very clearly like a Final Fantasy X or a Persona 2. This game does a lot of very interesting twists on JRPG combat and mechanics, and they teach it to you like 20 minutes in. And I should mention this game. I don't know how long a proper playthrough of the game is, maybe 30 hours, but in the first 45 minutes, you immediately have character deaths and time travel, and they explain the combat mechanics and the travel mechanics for you in just an action-packed first hour. The game wastes no time at all, giving the player a lot of agency and explaining what kind of game it is, which was refreshing. Like I couldn't believe the pace of the first hour of the game.
It doesn't really let up. Like throughout the whole game, you do get quieter moments, but the pacing is really a strong suit here, I think.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the game's pace is relentless at the beginning, and if you only go plot point to plot point, I think it keeps that relentlessness. But we've been dancing around it. This game is about time travel, and you can zoom back to different points of the game almost at your leisure after you reach a certain point. So the game's pace isn't exactly thrown out the window, but the player completely dictates their own pace after a certain point.
That's right. Yeah.
And let's actually get into the story a little bit. At the very beginning, you are a secret agent named Stock. You are working for the Kingdom of Alistel, and your boss is a shady guy named Hagues. And Alistel is at war with a neighboring country of Granorg, and that war has been going on an indeterminate amount of time. And so working for Hagues, he gives you a book in a very weirdly casual way at the very beginning of the game. And when your first mission with 2 new recruits, Marco and Rainey, goes very badly, you're teleported to a mysterious other world where 2 small children named Teo and Lipti tell you that you have the power of time travel and need to use time travel to manipulate the events of the war and potentially end the destruction of the world, because the world has been slowly turning into sand over the past few decades for reasons that are not clear immediately. So,
and isn't this like a new cycle? I think the very, very beginning is Teo and Lipti like witnessing yet another cycle of the world ending through desertification and them starting over.
That's right. Yeah. I think it opens with like.
Teo and Lipti have been potentially for decades or even hundreds of years been trying to manipulate time for the world to end for the world not to end, but have failed. And Stock is either their last chance or their best new chance. And they're
always hands off. Like they always are like They never tell you where to go, they tell Stock where to go or what to do, and they never really get involved directly. So it seems like there's like some kind of cosmic rule there that they have to follow.
They give vague...
It's like a non-interference.
They give vague advice, but they cannot act themselves, but they will tell Stock what he can and can't do with his powers. They're very much sort of hands off in that way, like you said. Yes.
Yeah, there's one side quest where they are a little bit more direct, but it's a little bit later on around like chapter 3 where you have to go and get the you have to tell like one of the doctors or something to plant a seed.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they're very direct there, and they literally like you pick one of the decisions, and then Teo and Lipti come up and they're like, "Oh, if you'd done it this way, maybe things had been different." And then if you go back, you get an additional option based on what they say, and you pick that, and then
it's about that's the one where I think you find that quest in chapter 1, but then you can't resolve it until chapter 3, where a doctor is looking for a way to sustainably plant. Are they cornuts or conuts?
Conuts.
Conuts. Yeah. So like coconuts without one co. So he's trying to find a way to plant conuts. When you find that information in a farming town and give it back to him, he says, "Great, I'll use these to build more mana to develop weapons." And the way to resolve that side quest is to first refuse to give him the information. Then Teo and Lipti say, that's remarkably forward-thinking of you to do that, but maybe you should suggest that he plant them sustainably and to revive the desert instead of using them for weapons. And then if you go back in time and replay the altercation with the botanist again, you have a third option that you didn't before. That's the kind of plot resolution that happens in this game. Like, you learn something in one timeline, and then you use that to, or find something in the future, and you use that to manipulate the past or manipulate the other half of the timeline. And we haven't even mentioned this yet. This game has 2 timelines, because after your mission fails near the beginning of the game, you have the choice: do you want to stick with Hagues and the Special Intelligence Division and keep working as a secret agent for him, or do you want to join your best friend Rosh, who was given his own unit for the first time? Rosh is I think he was badly injured in the past, so now he basically fights in a mechanized frame with a robot arm. Rosh is pretty dope.
I gotta ask about that. Like, what doctor was like, here, have this spiky metal gauntlet made out of scrap metal just to be your regular daily prosthetic?
I'll tell you exactly which doctor.
Yeah,
that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I know which doctor.
Yeah,
come on.
Yeah, it's the really gross dude who has not known a scruple his entire life.
Yeah.
It actually makes a kind of sense.
What's his name? Like, it's like Hessel or Hanel or something?
Hessel, I think. Yeah, I must admit, when he first appeared, I was like, oh my god. Like, because his entire body is like, just like, he's like on wheels and he's like robotic and...
Yeah, he has like he's like a much less attractive version of Norg from Final Fantasy VIII, who has like a grotesque like a grotesque body in some kind of iron throne, where it's like that there's no way that this is a good guy in a JRPG. And speaking of which, like, your boss Hagues from the very beginning is a weird twisted gnome of a man. It's like, how is this guy supposed to be a good guy? No way he's a good guy.
I appreciate that the game is saying something there, because Hagues is like the head of the spooks, like he's the CIA guy, and like, so the game is basically saying, like, you know, clandestine services, like special super secret stuff involving large superpowers, that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's pretty new to Alistair as well, isn't it? Like, it only
it's
came
like a
in
new
very
thing,
recently. Yeah, he came up with it all on his own. Like, no offense to anybody in the world, there's no way anyone with a nose like that is good. Like, the minute he came on screen, I was like, I don't trust you at all. Especially when he gives you the White Chronicle, which is the name of the book that you can time travel with. I'm like, it's the way he says it. He's just like, oh, this is just a book. It might come in handy.
Don't worry about it. It's just a book.
The only way I'm trusting a guy with a face that twisted is if he's welcoming me to the Velvet Room, and that's basically the only situation, the only scenario.
Yeah, I feel like if I was Stock, okay, and then my Vulture Man boss handed me a mystery book, and then all my friends died, and I met 2 creepy twins in some weird, like, Escher painting world, I would not be as on board as Stock is.
Yeah,
Stock is just the consummate professional.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, Stock.
True, he's profesh.
Stock is incredibly easygoing in how he accepts his new powers. Like, oh, I can time travel now and save people. Dope, let's do it. And he's sort of like cool and collected to a bizarre degree. While Rosh is a little bit more fiery and passionate than Stock is.
He really is. Like, Stock for a main character. I thought he was gonna... I wasn't really sure what to make of him at first, but, like, he's cool and collected, but he's one of these characters who, like, the minute any of his friends are in danger, he's like, wait, no, I can't lose anybody. I'm assuming because he's been through something similar. We know, like, Rosh has obviously been in that war that happened, or the fight before the game, so that's why he's got the gauntlet arm. But, like, Stock has the same kind of thing. Like, he doesn't want to lose anybody close to him, so he doesn't want, because he doesn't want Rainey and Marcos at the beginning. He says, I don't need partners, I don't want partners. And the minute he gets them, he gets very attached to them very quickly, and the minute he loses them in that first bit, he's kind of beside himself. So he doesn't even think about using the white. The first thing he does is like use the White Chronicle. He's like, no second chance, so no second guesses, I'm gonna go back and save them. So yeah, I really like Stock a lot.
I'm glad you brought. We're bringing this up now because both Stock and Rosh. This is kind of what I was talking about before. They appear to fill an archetype at first, and they end up quickly revealing themselves to be far more human. Like Rosh is like a little more passionate, wears his feelings a little more on his sleeve. But there are several interactions with his girlfriend, and their relationship is like a bit on the rocks. Like I don't think we know the details all the way. But at some point,
Sonia has definitely known Rosh a long time, probably since childhood. But as they get deeper into what's going on in Alistel, Rosh sort of gaining in the ranks as a soldier, and Sonia becoming a more accomplished machinist or doctor or whatever her exact role is.
Science.
Yeah, general scientist. She is less and less okay with Rosh, like risking his life more and more. Is the vibe I got.
Yeah, and there's a cool thing there where at some point you have a chance to kind of help them out, and you have a choice to like go after Sonya yourself or send Rosh to go talk to her, and you don't ever see their conversation. It just kind of warps ahead in time, and you can talk to Rosh, and he says, "Hey, thank you for that, but let's talk about business now." And there's a sweet side to both of these guys. And regarding like Rainey and Marco and their relationship with Stock, like the archetype I thought Stock was going to fill was be the hyper competent, cool, collected, like cool and temperament guy, and he would just end up being frustrated with Rainey and Marco, or maybe Rainey and Marco would be incompetent or bumbling. But
Marco definitely is incompetent and bumbling.
I mean, yeah, he kind of is, but to a large extent, that's not like really true of Stock. Stock, like Alana said, he ends up caring about them a lot and shows a real kind of deepness to his, a real depth to his humanity, and his competence, or the things he's seen and the things he's done. And it's clear that he's experienced in like warfare and things like that, and obviously qualified for this espionage stuff. He is very he has a lot of humanity and is just has a lot of care in his heart for those around him.
One thing definitely true of Stock is that he's experienced loss, and I think that he really is this easygoing and cool character. But when one of his friends is threatened, or he feels like he might lose someone again, he becomes more desperate and more emotional. But I, like Stock and Rosh being these sort of two different kinds of guys who really trust each other and help each other in ways that aren't always the most intuitive ways. I think it's pretty powerful. I generally like everyone in this cast, except for maybe Marco, who could be we could throw him in the trash.
Well, no.
Marco's not that bad.
He's that bad.
I'm a Marco man.
No,
I can't take that Marco slander.
Get out of here, Marco.
Based on their interactions, I assumed Stock and Rosh would be a certain type of character, and they weren't that type of character. And I found them endearing because of their interactions, like you said, Sollosi. So, yeah, it's more just like I'm expecting them to be set up in one way, and they're not, and I'm kind of charmed by that. I love them both. Look, this cast is really great, basically.
Yeah, I definitely see the archetype thing. I feel like, in anime and RPGs, like we see a certain character, like maybe their silhouette, and we like have this idea of what they're going to be like, and then this game did a really good job of sort of like tricking us into thinking they're going to be one way, and then really developing the characters, in the way Stock is more than the lone wolf. He sticks alone because he doesn't want anyone to get hurt, stuff like that. I think they do, they manage that with every character in different ways, and I really appreciated that so far.
Yeah, totally.
And looking at the rest of the cast, we mentioned Ott already. She's a Satyros, which means she has small horns. She's a little girl, probably, probably no older than 13, I would say. And she seems to really like Stock, and incredibly enthusiastically joins your party before I even realized it. Like when you just meet her and her friends in the traveling troupe, she suddenly joins your party and is immediately your best spellcaster. And I'm like, what just happened here?
Right.
Yeah, that was in the espionage route. The other route, I don't know if we really got to it yet, is Stock chooses to join Rosh as his lieutenant or as his aide de camp. And so the standard history is Stock going on clandestine missions and traveling to Grenorg, the other kingdom in the war. And while the alternate timeline is Stock spending more time with Rosh and fighting more on the front line. In chapter 1, I think you have that altercation at a mine, and that's being fought over between the two sides. Chapters 2 and 3, you're fighting in this area called the Sand Fortress a lot, which is a bit of a strategic base that has changed hands multiple times over the course of the war, and then and you have to sort of deal with the fallout of the conflict in end of chapter 3, beginning of chapter 4. So the standard history is more traveling in small groups, clandestine missions, and the alternate timeline is more like seeing the war front with Rosh. And I don't know, there's a level of politics here that reminds me of a Matsuno game more than like a Final Fantasy game. You're not exactly a bunch of plucky misfits on a quest to save the world, but it's also not exactly like large scale battles, political machinations. It almost does each of those two stories in the two halves of the timeline. Because the world shaping, world turning into sand, we need to save the world is more on the espionage side than the warfare side.
Yeah, like, going back a little bit, because, like, I think one of the really interesting things is because there's two different timelines, there's two things that really stand out to me that... Because I was really worried things would get really confusing. Like, you're managing two timelines and you're going across multiple different areas. But I think Radiant Historia really works because the world is relatively small. You're only, in the first half of the game, you only go between... 3 or 4 different towns, maybe at the most, and like 2 dungeons.
Yeah, so it's 2 big towns and 2 small towns, and 2 field areas, and I think 2 dungeons. Like the mines and the sewers, right?
Right, pretty much. Yeah. And in the Sand Fortress, I suppose, sort of. But that like, varies between dungeon and whatever. But yeah, like it's so compact that even though you're like retreading a lot of ground all the time, it's so easy to keep track with things, even if you're not like paying tons of attention to the timeline. Like, the game does a really good job of dropping hints, because like I know we're jumping around a little bit, but like one of the things, like going back to the mine the first time you go there, if you go there as like your first option, which I think is if you're working on if you join Rosh's brigade, you go to the mine and it's like, oh, you can either wait it out and ambush, or you can go straight in on your own. And if you pick one of them, all of these points, like at the end of nodes on the timeline, you get like a choice between one and the other answer. One answer will move the plot on. The other answer will give you a bad ending, which is just like flavor text, but you can warp straight back to that point.
Oh, I love collecting bad endings. It's
me
the
too.
Best. Yeah. And that's not just a pathological need for me to fill every node on the flowchart. That's part of it. But part of it is I just do like seeing how things can go badly. Like getting a bad end in a choose your own adventure book and then going back and picking the other thing.
That's exactly what it's like. Yeah, it's really cool. But, like, I think the game also does a really good job of, like, it's pretty obvious what the bad choice is most of the time. Like, the text and the dialogue beforehand always gives you little hints as to what you should be doing. Like, at the end or the middle of Chapter 3, you have to choose between Raoul, who is, like, the person above Rosh in the Alistal army, and then you have to choose between Raoul and Rosh leading. And if you pick Raoul, you get the bad ending because the dialogue beforehand is saying like, oh, Roche would be the ideal person. And everyone's like, yeah, but he's got his gauntlets broken. And it does such a good job of like dropping hints. And then some of the good endings or some of the right paths, you have to go and swap between the two timelines. But again, it always tells you what you need exactly. So, you know, again, with the gauntlet, it's like, oh, if you could get all the parts for me, that would be great. And then you get it in the other timeline, and it's like, oh, shoot, I'll go back and do that now, or you can know where to go. So, like, it's really manageable, and I think that's what a lot of RPGs struggle with, that they use time travel. Like, Chrono Trigger is the best one otherwise, but, like, time travel often gets, like, it's convoluted, and Radiant Historia distills it down to a single continent, which Chrono Trigger does as well, kind of, and gives you, like, set locations and tips everywhere. So it's structured so well and it's paced so well that, yeah, I thought I was going to be confused and I wasn't.
Yeah, I had the same worry going in, but super manageable, and it's like, it all makes sense. It's logical when a lot of time travel stories, especially in games, aren't.
Yeah, I think so.
And most of it's documented. Like, if you check that
Yeah,
flowchart,
yeah,
it'll
good
give you a little node for almost every important plot point and almost every side quest. Even though most of the sliding doors moments in the game are resolved by go into the future and bring something back, go into the past and bring something back, or go to the other timeline and bring something back. It's done in a way that I agree. Like, it's helped by by creating a small, dense game space. But it remains manageable and sensible, mostly for the whole playthrough.
To go back to like the good bad ending thing, I feel like I usually kind of hate that in games when like you feel like you have to make the correct choice, like why have a choice at all? But this is like the one game where I feel like it works, because from the beginning you know that you're trying to weave delicately through all the choices in the game to get the one, you know, find the one path to this, you know, saving the world. It's not a matter of like choosing your own adventure. It's about, you know, choosing the path for everyone to live, sort of thing. And it's like the one time in a game where I've actually appreciated where you had to make the right choice.
Yeah, Teo and Lipti mention almost from the beginning that you're not trying to find. You are trying to find the one best outcome, but by doing so, you can see all the bad outcomes and just very carefully shape it to be what you want. I mean, we've apologized a couple times already for jumping around in this plot, but if there's one episode to do it on, it's the game where you literally jump around the plot a whole bunch. And also, I mean, let's not get too into quantum mechanics here, but the two paths here basically exist in a quantum state where kind of both events are happening at the same time or in parallel times, and you're able to influence the other timeline from one timeline. It doesn't always make sense. I mean, I guess you have to explain it with quantum theory, but like this is in chapter. This might even be in the prologue before chapter 1. But if you rescue a merchant from bandits in one path, he'll make it to the mine to deliver his goods in time. In the other path, they're separate timelines, but Stock doing something in one timeline does affect the other. Later, when you have to confront Roche about his broken arm, like after you give him a replacement arm and get get him to be more inspired and passionate again in one timeline, when you replay the events where you get his arm in the other timeline, Roche confronts you and instead of fighting you is more amenable to rebelling against Alistel. This is again, we're jumping around a lot, but Alistel is sort of revealed to be every bit as villainous as Grenorg, especially with General Hugo sort of in charge of things. Alistel is basically a religious fundamentalist society ruled by the prophet Noah, but and Noah's an elderly man who has not been seen in public for many years, and Hugo acts as Noah's mouthpiece and essentially runs the country by reporting on what Noah said, even though nobody has actually seen Noah in a while, and it's obvious that eventually that Hugo and maybe also Heiss have designs to rule over the whole continent, while Grenorg's queen, Queen Protea, is a complete despot who is living in luxury while the people people suffer, and her two ministers are trying to sort of keep her in line while winning the war against Alistel. But there's no obvious good guy in this conflict except for maybe Stock. But again, the two timelines are parallel but not really separate because they're influencing each other, even when Stock is doing things much, much less subtle than handing seeds from one timeline to a botanist in the other.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, there are even times when, like, affecting the emotions of a character in one time changes their emotions in another timeline. That was the main time where I was
just like Rosh in those. Yeah, just like that sequence with Rosh at the end of chapter 3.
Mm-hmm. I actually love that sequence because that's the one where, you know, he fights you and then you fix the timeline and then he's like, oh yeah, maybe I will rebel. And then he specifically says something, or Stock specifically says something like, I'd never dream of fighting you. And I thought that was just so funny.
Yeah, he said, oh, there's no, like Raj says something like, I came here planning to fight you if necessary, but I guess we're of the same mind. And then Stock says, yeah, I could never dream of the two of us fighting. When you literally had fought him twice in a row, back to back.
Even like 2 minutes earlier in gameplay.
Yeah, just come from the other timeline and done just
so
that.
Funny.
It's great.
And you don't have to do everything in exactly the same order. I think I was a little bit better at keeping the timelines roughly along the same level of completion playing it this time, but I remember the first time I played it, one timeline got like 5 nodes ahead of the other, completely by accident. I'm not 100% sure, but I think I was like stuck in the sand fortress looking for bombs for a long time in the alternate timeline, and I got almost all the way to chapter 4 in the standard timeline. I think this is you know, these are just handprints on my retired DS Lite from 8 years ago. But yeah, it's interesting how they make it clear from the beginning that you are going to do some time travel shenanigans, and they give you a set of rules and then only sort of vaguely follow them, but in a way that it seems like that the player feels in control, and that the player feels like that they're always discovering new things. Yeah, it's just really good at it. This game, all of its story mechanics, from the plot itself to how you jump between nodes of the timeline, I think is really fun.
It's really clever, and it like another way the two timelines are split so clearly and like makes so much more sense to me is like there's like a key focal point. Not only are you like part of different factions and split off for different reasons, but in alternate history, Teo and Leavitt are very obvious in saying that Rosh is the key. But in standard history, it's the princess.
Erica. We haven't talked about her yet. Mm-hmm.
We have not talked about Erica and her really cool haircut and her gun. I love Erica so much. She is she's cool.
Great.
She has like a princess armor where she still wears her crown in public and fights with a gun, but is basically a magic user and like timeline manipulator. She's I think the first character that gets that character switching spell that I would use to give Stock a bunch of extra turns to push people into Ott's traps a lot.
Actually, just fighting you on the Marco thing. I think he gets it first.
but you've ignored the incredibly important fact that he's Marco and is never on my team ever.
You were wrong.
You're wrong. Hang on. Okay, like diversion slightly. Why does Marco have like cat ears? Is it just his helmet? Because Marco is supposed
helmet,
to.
I'm gonna go with helmet.
He does not know how to wear clothes that fit like an adult.
Yeah, he's clearly supposed to look like a teddy bear, so I think that's a pro for him.
I think so
it works.
too.
I'm on Team Marco. Marco's fine.
That explains why he's so fragile and useless.
Well,
I think he's really useful. I mean, like
he's until Raj gets some good moves, he's probably the second best space manipulator other than Stock. And he's a good healer, either tied with Ott or maybe even slightly better than Ott until Ott gets some good spells. Like he's useful. I just think he's annoying and never ever want to use him. I think the two worst characters mechanically, I think that Rainey's actually not very good, but I like her personality, so I keep her around a little bit more often. But like with Rainey, like she's more about direct damage, and I like the Ott playstyle more than the Rainey playstyle, even though her Rainey's pretty strong. It's I don't know. Like, there's a lot of interesting playstyles in this game, based on all of the space and time manipulation, because you're manipulating space in the 3x3 grid and manipulating time with turn order. That is just, I don't know. Like, I don't think there's any bad character in this game, even though I do have a completely inexplicable dislike of Marco.
Is it because Marco looks like a child character?
But I like Ott is the thing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Okay.
I normally dislike child characters. This is well documented on the podcast.
Yeah.
I think that, I don't know, like Falcom and Namco are both huge culprits here. But I think I like Ott because of her mechanics and dislike Margot because of his personality. So I'm really not being consistent here. But
you're well within your right to dislike Marco. It's fine.
Marco's actually, like, if you put him on the right team, he shines. Like stock Ott and Marco.
Yeah. No. My favorite team in the game is stock Ott and a second pusher, and that can be Marco, but I just never want to use Marco.
Right. To pull it back to Erica and to standard history, the reason you're going after Erica, you've been given an assignment by Hagues to assassinate the princess of Grenorg. And so you have to sneak in, do some espionage, and you go through the sewers.
Sewer mechanic.
And then you sneak in. It's not a bad one, actually.
I just played a game for review last month that had like 3 sewer levels in it. I was incredulous.
Cloaca Maxima.
Yeah, Cloaca Maxima is one of them, and for the uninitiated, cloaca is the name of an orifice in birds, lizards, and some other animals where all of the waste exits. So yeah, Cloaca Maxima was a dungeon in East 9. Continue.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, enough of that. But yeah, when you go to the castle and you find out that you get ambushed essentially by some soldiers, and then you find out that Erica is actually the leader of the resistance who is going up against her. It is her mother, isn't it? Because I know she talks about mother or stepmother.
It's her stepmother.
Stepmother,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's right. It is stepmother. Yeah. So she's trying to.
The 2 ministers of Grenorg, Dias and Selvan, who are sort of trying to win the war in spite of how incompetent Queen Protea is. They even mention we had King Victor marry a commoner to inspire the people or get the people behind him more because Victor was not a popular king. But Protea ended up being just as incompetent and dangerous as her ex-husband.
She's pretty terrifying, isn't
she?
She has no care for anybody else in the world. And actually, like, Dias and Selvan as well they're very cunning. Like, the first time you see them, they're talking to Queen Protea. I think this is, like, either the end of chapter 1 or the beginning of chapter 2. And then they go off into their own room and they start, like, talking about what to do in, like, a really sinister way. So again, like, this, like, lack of, like, these muddled moralities between different characters. It's like, are they on our side? Are they on Protea's side? Are they on whose side? They're on their own side, of course. But like, yeah. But yeah, standard history is really cool because you join this kind of resistance because at this point you realize, I think, that, well, first of all, Stock's a bit wary of assassinating the princess anyway. Like, the whole party are like, yeah, it's our job, but also this is a little bit extreme. But I think you find out later on that essentially you're being blackmailed, or I might be getting the 2 timelines mixed up now. But yeah, Erica opens up a bunch of things basically because she, like Rosh, is the key of standard history, and there's a campfire scene where she seems to recognize Stock. She looks at him for a while, and he says, like, "Why are you looking at me like that?" And she's like, "You remind me of my brother." And I'm like, all right, that's pretty normal. But, like, there's things that she says, like, she knows about the desertification because of her family's history. So Stock has to be even more wary around her because one thing Stock's agreed to do is not say anything about the White Chronicle or the time-traveling mechanics to anyone.
Right.
Erica seems to be aware of it slightly. Not towards him, but she's aware of something. Like, she's like, it's got to be you who's part of the resistance. But also, as well in alternate history this is standard history. She, like, drops some hints that she knows something. She's got, like, a revival magic spell, but also she gives you a white page and refers to it being part of a book, doesn't she, which gives you a skill.
Yeah, I think she gives you the white page and the black page, which give you the sort of limit break meter skills.
Right, yeah, and At seems very aware of something, and the rest of the troop that she travels with are like, oh, you know, she's special, don't worry about it, like, or they kind of like dance around something. So there are a couple of characters who are aware of this ability to jump between timelines or time travel in some way, but we don't know how that's playing out yet. But
there's a lot of they're withholding information from the player and hinting at greater powers here, which is to be expected because we're only talking about the first half of the game. But things like multiple people understanding that Stock is special. I still don't totally understand why Hagues gave Stock the White Chronicle, because Hagues seems to be your sponsor and your ally at the beginning of the game, and Stock really feels like he owes Hagues, because it seems like that. I think Stock was some kind of war orphan or a similar situation, and Hagues didn't raise him necessarily, but Hagues gave him the position that he has right now in the Alistel military. But Hagues is clearly trying to cover up some pretty vile plans that General Hugo at General Hugo's office, that he has a brief fight with Stock against Stock in trying to obtain them. So it's like Hagues gives you the White Chronicle and puts you on the path to possibly fixing the world's timeline, but less than 10 hours later is clearly antagonistic. I don't know what Hagues' motivations are at all yet, but there's a lot of moral gray area going on in this global conflict, even though there are a couple characters that are clearly more egomaniacal than others. Queen Protea is pretty indefensible, but in the standard history, you go off to assassinate Erica, ultimately decide not to, and help the resistance. Queen Protea burns down her own kingdom to try and smoke out the resistance, and then blames it on the resistance, which is a good guy move, obviously. And then you escape the kingdom. Go and intend to meet up with another kingdom, Cygnus, and deliver Erica to the king of Cygnus to enlist their help in this conflict. And it's when you're on the way to Cygnus when you get that campfire scene with the heart to heart between Stock and Erica. Well, on the alternate timeline, you have a successful mission with Roche defending a mine that is possibly a secret passage between the two countries, and then you have a successful excursion to the Sand Fortress, and then a disastrously bad mission out of the Sand Fortress, where what's the name of the female general that's working there?
Viola, yeah.
Viola, who was almost exiled to the front line because Hugo felt she was getting too popular among the citizens of Alistel, so he sent her away to hold power and influence in Alistel, which is another good guy move, clearly. But after a mission goes very, very badly in Alistel, Stock has to travel to the other timeline to get intel that might save the battle. Or save some of the soldiers, but most of Roche's brigade gets wiped out. I really think I've been switching between Roche and Roche this whole time, and I'm not comfortable about it.
That's fine. That's so sad, that timeline where you have to go and get the information, because it didn't feel good, because, if you don't have the information, Roche dies and Keel dies. Keel is adorable as well. I love Keel to bits.
Yeah.
Like the sword dancer who teaches you how to dance with swords and get past in the other timeline. But yeah, and then you bring the information back from the other timeline, stop the ambush. But they still all die, and Keel as well, is the one who, I think Keel, Roche, and Stock are trying to escape together, while Marco and Rainey are, fighting back some of the enemies, and Keel is the one who tells Stock, no, you have to live, I have to go, you have to be the one to save Roche, and Roche is no, just leave me. And then Stock carries Roche back as far as he can, but Keel dies in such a horrible way, and I felt so bad.
God, right?
He never had a chance.
I felt like they were teasing you. The player thinks, if I get this intel, I can prevent this massacre and we'll all survive. When really the new outcome is everyone still dies except you do manage to save Roche.
Yeah, there's a line, I think it's in that bit, it might be earlier, that Stock says to Roche, and he says, because Roche is leave me behind, let me die. And Stock goes, no, you no longer just live for yourself, or something along those lines. And It really got me because, like, obviously all of Rosh's men have like sacrificed their lives for him, and it's the second time it's happened to Rosh as well. Like, this happened before the game, and this is what causes Rosh to be in his like depression, where his arm is no longer working, and he has to have life-saving an operation as well. It's a really tense sequence, that whole section.
And also, I mean, Rosh is wearing this heavy armor and is part mechanical. How did Stock manage to carry him across 1.5 battlefields?
Stock, he works out.
Yeah.
I mean, the White he did get that ability to push those big blocks around, and everyone's like, "How can you push that around?"
Oh, that's right.
Oh, true.
Just imagining being in Rosh's position and losing everyone, witnessing like your direct subordinate Keel sacrifice himself for you, your kind of disabilities being exacerbated further, and just I really believed what they did with him for that next while, where he's just completely done with everything. And it's really not. I actually got kind of stuck on this part for a little bit, trying to figure out how to get his spirits back up and get the plot moving forward. But it really impacted me a lot. Seeing that whole sequence was really something.
Yeah, the entire first half of the game, like, this is the sequence that sticks out to me. Like Sollosi was talking about, first you get this weird gameplay thing where this is the first time where you can't find the perfect ending. Like, you go in thinking you're going to save everyone, and then you're crushed as the player. And then right after, you have to watch, Keel like die trying to save everyone or trying to distract them for that extra moment, and then watching, Rosh just completely crushed after losing his men. And what's the name of the song? I had it. Oh, this is the part, to go back to Yoko Shimomura. I think all of the songs in this soundtrack are kind of like sleeper hits. Like, you'll hear them a few times and you're like, oh, that's nice. And then it will hit at the perfect moment and it just crushes me. Like, one of her songs plays when Rosh is explaining, like, why do I deserve to live when they had to die? And then, like, her song is playing, and that got me. That crushed me.
Yes. Where the wind and the feathers return. I know exactly what one
thank
mean.
you.
Yeah, it's so sad. Yeah.
There's a lot of unusual survivor's guilt and like responding to trauma in this game, because we know that Stock experienced some vague loss in the past that is affecting him today, and Rainey and Marco were members of a mercenary troop that died under disastrous circumstances, and they were the only survivors. And I think
that's the mine, isn't it? Yeah, she has a reaction, doesn't she, when it caves in?
Mm-hmm. And I think Rosh is. He's when all this horrible stuff happens at the Sand Fortress, he's reliving the worst part of the worst memory of his whole life, because he was the only survivor, or one of a few survivors, from the battle that had him that left him disabled. And then Alistel technology, it gives him this armor and a mechanical gauntlet that lets him fight again and live again. So he feels this great debt to Alistel for giving him a second chance, and then it's ripped away from him again when he is in the events of Radiant Historia, where him and Stock are the only survivors of the fight. But this time his arm is destroyed, and he doesn't even have that anymore. So it's just a triple gut punch to poor Rosh. And you have to do all kinds of time travel shenanigans, including fighting him twice to get him back in the spirit again.
I have a lot of respect for, like you were alluding to, how they address trauma in this game. In so many JRPGs, these horrible things happen to the characters, and they're just like, hope, friendship, let's shrug it off. Mm-hmm. So, like, whenever games actually address it in a meaningful way, I have so much respect for that. And can we talk about Rainey a little bit?
Let's do it.
Oh my god! So she's like the only character when I think it's the standard history, when you've decided to help the princess, and Rainey is the only one holding back, right?
Mm-hmm. And she holds back for all of 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's all of 2 minutes, but like, I get it. She has like I think that's such a moment for her character where, she understands that Hagues is kind of a monster in his own way, but she owes her life and Marco's life to him, and giving them a second chance. And like her pausing and having apprehension for that that was another moment that hit me almost as much as Rosh's survivor guilt.
This game, dealing with all these things as smartly as it does, in my opinion, probably earns the way that you get Rosh back in business, which is you fight him to like snap him out of it. And it's a very like hyper masculine way to do it, but because this game is so sensitive in every other part, and Rosh and Stock are both so well developed, it's a situation that you believe. It feels less stereotypical. It feels real.
Yeah, I agree. It's like they address the trauma, and then they make it clear that he's lost his fighting spirit because he's lost so much. So you're not fighting him just to like slap him and tell him to be a man or whatever. You're like trying to restore his fighting spirit because you care about him. And so like I agree, it works.
Listen, I've played 5 Yakuza games in the past 7 or 8 months, so I understand. I have learned a thing or two about men resolving their emotions through their fists. Because that's all those games are to a degree. But yeah, I feel like that the character turn from Rosh is earned, and in part it's because he has to confront his loyalty to Alastel in one timeline. Then you sort of restore, and you fight him once. And then his fighting spirit is restored in that second fight in the other timeline. And then when you go back to the standard timeline, instead of fighting him to the near death again, again the quantum existence of these two timelines affecting each other. That's where we get the conversation where Stock could never dream of fighting him because instead of confronting him to kill Stock, he confronts Stock to tell him that he's going to switch sides. So it's Raj goes through some stuff in this game, but I think he's an unusually compelling character. And I only say unusually because I think it's so unusual that when he finally rejoins you permanently, he's like 8 to 10 levels less than everyone else. That's right, annoying.
Yeah.
It's like, man,
I've
known Gafka for 5 minutes and he's like 8 levels ahead of Rosh. That's not fair.
Exactly.
Yeah. Honestly, that's a problem with like all the characters. Like the only characters I really considered using were Stock, Rainey, Marco, and Ott, because they're the only ones that are consistently with you. Yeah, everyone else is like in and out, and I found it too frustrating.
Yeah, Erica joins you very late, and then she leaves your party soon after. So she's probably, if you're playing roughly evenly between using all the characters, she probably has the lowest level other than Roche.
Yeah, also, isn't it really curious that it doesn't matter at what point in any timeline you're at, every character is the same level that they were in whatever other timeline and has all the same equipment and everything, all the same items. I do too. I keep looking. I'm like, I see you there. That weapon I bought 2 months later. Like I see.
No, it's like suddenly I have a very different spear.
No. It's a quantum state. When you affect something in one timeline, then the events in the other timeline correct themselves to arrive at the same conclusion. It's the cat is both alive and dead until you open the box.
It's still just fun for me to like wake up one morning and like imagine myself waking up one morning and saying like, oh, this 6-pack, where'd this come from? Hey.
Must have been the other timeline.
Yep.
The other timeline.
Like switching between timelines is like using Facebook like using Photoshop on your social media. Just changing everything so that it was like that all along.
Right.
The perfect timeline. That's how you create the perfect timeline.
Yeah. You have to tinker everything as much as you can until it arrives at the best possible outcome. But Alana, Pete, and Kaleb, we have been jumping around this timeline, discussing this game, and I think the best possible outcome is to save the rest of the discussion for another episode after we've all finished and have a great many more thoughts. And I remember some of the big plot events of the end game, but I don't think all of them. Like Pete and I said, I'm surprised at what I'm remembering and surprised at what I'm not remembering.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited. I almost can't predict where things are going to go. Like, obviously we're going to go to the bottom half of the continent now, which is going to be really fun. But like, part of me does not trust Hugo, and I don't know whether that's misplaced or not. It's just because I don't trust...
Do you mean Raoul? Because Hugo is
Raoul, sorry. Yeah, Hugo I definitely don't trust.
Yeah, Hugo is the bald one that's very untrustworthy, and Raoul's the tactician.
I'm not sure. There's a few characters I'm not sure of. Like, Raoul is one of them. I mean, obviously, the two generals who in one timeline one of them's like missing. Like you can pick up a side quest off of a hooded figure, and then in the other timeline, you basically take Dias by the throat and get the sword off of him, and it's called the assassination of Dias, that side quest. And yeah, there's like a few things going on that I'm really not sure about. Like, where are they going to go with Roche in the second half of alternate history? Obviously, Erica's going to become very important. So, at what point? Surely everybody has to find out about the White Chronicle at some point. How are they going to find out about that, and how is that going to resolve itself? And is the entire continent going to turn into a desert? Who knows?
I know, but the story is so spicy.
Oh yeah, so Kaleb, you've either finished the game or almost finished it, right? You're further ahead than I am.
Yeah, I got way too into it, and I finished it, and I will say nothing about it, of course.
Oh, extremely
wow.
fair. Well, I might have mentioned this before, or maybe it was on another podcast, but when I played this, let's say 9-10 years ago, I did not get the good ending. I had I got to some incomplete, slightly dissatisfying resolution to the story, because I think that it's I'd have to check a guide to make sure. I think that there's neighborhood of 9 to 12 specific side quests that you have to do to get the good ending. You don't need to do every single side quest in the game, but you have to complete a number of the optional side quests to get the best ending. So I'm gonna before we record the second half of this podcast, before we record the next episode of this podcast, I'm going to visit online guides a little bit and make sure I get the outcome that everyone here wants.
Yeah, I have that saved in my phone if anyone wants it.
I can figure it out. I mean, if we're talking about what's going on in the next episode, and I've made the Schrodinger's cat reference that I've been waiting to make for an hour and 10 minutes, then I think we are near the end of Radiant Historia Part 1. So next week, listeners, you probably figured this out already. We're doing another Radiant Historia episode. I have a lot of game ahead of me still. I think I'm only around 13 or 14 hours in, which I think is around halfway, but I'm not 100% sure. But that's coming at the end of February. And coming in March, we have 2 episodes planned, one on Crimson Shroud, the Matsuno 3DS iWare game, I think. It was a download-only game for the 3DS, released a couple years ago. That's a really unique and cool thing that a couple members of RPG Fan were keen to play, so I was keen to record a podcast on it. And also, we're doing our second episode in our multi-part series on Final Fantasy XIV, this time about Heavensward, those coming in the first half of March. And in the second half of March, we're doing 2 episodes on Muramasa, the Demon Blade, which we'll see if that can be the second Vanillaware game I'm interested in enough to actually finish. But if you have questions for us or comments to us about Radiant Historia, Muramasa, Crimson Shroud, or anything at all, you can email us at retro@rpgfan.com, or also comment on RPG Fan's message boards, visit the Facebook page, visit the Instagram page, visit the Twitter page, our Discord server, our YouTube channel, our Twitch channel. There's something streaming every day on Twitch, and a lot of our written reviews get converted to video form for that YouTube channel. Please engage with RPG Fan in whatever manner you please, but I would love it if one of those means was by listening to our podcasts. And those podcasts don't only mean Retro Encounter. We have 3 other fine podcasts: Random Encounter about randomness, Rhythm Encounter about RPG music, and Phoenix Edge, which is another weekly podcast mostly focused on current events. You can review all 4 of RPG Fans' podcasts on iTunes, Google Play, or whatever listening venue you use. Give us all the feedback you are willing to provide, please. And if you want to provide more direct feedback, you can reach out to us on our individual social media channels. Let's share them with you, starting with you, Kaleb.
So I have a Twitter now. You can find me
do?
at... yeah, I got one.
This is new to me.
You can find me at Fuffa30. It's Fuffa 30, if you want to.
Fufa30. I will follow you 1 minute after we're done recording. Listeners, if you want to play Internet Detective and find out when we recorded, that's the way to do it. But Pete, how can listeners find you?
So on Twitter, I'm Pete Barbero1, and if you want to see someone with an unhealthy relationship to Genshin Impact and historical combat flight simulators, you can go to twitch.tv/RGHalfpenny.
Yeah, man, I'm always confused whether if I'm looking for your Twitter page or something, Pete. It's like, is this one Barbaro, Regulation, or Halfpenny? I'm not sure which. He uses all three.
I'm all over the place with that, and that's my bad. And I'm just gonna deal with it as best I can.
Across the bay, yeah.
But Alana, how can listeners find you?
So it's pretty easy. I'm mostly on Twitter as @Alana Hagues, so come follow me there if you want to see what I tweet about. I'm on Twitter way too much, basically. I'm also on the RPG Fan Discord, so if you're part of there, just @Alana, and I will probably come running with Flammy. Or if you want to email me, you can. I am alanah@rpgfan.com.
And listeners, if you want to reach me, I also am named different things in confusing places on the internet. On Twitter, I'm @TheRealMonsoon most of the time, @Evoker4Dogs other times. I am also Monsoon Mike on RPG Fans Discord, and Sollosi @rpgfan.com is my site email address. And I think my mental bandwidth is not broad enough for me to support any more social media. I'm basically done. I don't even have an Instagram page. But listeners, we don't care what social media you have or don't have. We just are very, very appreciative that you are listening to our podcast. And even if you jump around the timeline by listening to episodes out of order, that's fine. I do the same, especially in games like Radiant Historia. Thank you, good night, and good luck.